Michelle, Bridget, welcome back both to the studio. No escape from cost of living pressures and interest rates coming as they did, Michelle, in the midst of question time. Do you have anything to conclude from the Reserve Bank's statement that this may be drawing towards the end of the rate rises?
Yeah, there's been some speculation that we think that inflation is moderating and that this might be the end of these hikes. This is inflicting a lot of pain in Australia, around the country. We've heard today from the Treasurer that mortgage repayments have actually doubled in a year. They've gone from 11 billion last year to 22 billion this year. So that is a substantial impost now on household budgets. So we know that Australians are doing tough. Our absolute focus now is on cost of living relief. And that's coming through short-term, medium-term and long-term measures. Short-term, cheaper medicines, cheaper childcare, which is going to kick in on 1st of July. We've also advocated to raise the minimum wage to help our most vulnerable in our community. And we brought in energy relief to shield businesses in our industry so that Australians can continue to work in these jobs. Energy was actually existential for businesses, so we've addressed that. And then longer term now, we're looking at pivoting Australia to a manufacturing nation, to a country that starts to make things, which is absolutely pivotal to our future prosperity.
It's the short term, though, isn't it, Bridget, where the pinch is really felt? What's the tolerance, do you think, for yet another one next month?
Look, I think people are really doing it very tough, and certainly in my part of the world, you know, mortgage stress is creating a lot of pressure for people as well as other cost of living pressures. And I think it's that short-term relief that people are really looking to at the moment. I take what Michelle has said, you know, at face value in terms of the medium and the longer term strategies, but it's the short term where people are really feeling the pain. And some of those things, cost of medicines is great, cost of childcare is still a little way down the road, and then you know, things like power prices, we're not seeing those come down for households and businesses.
But it kind of needs to be, doesn't it, a delayed response, because if you shoveled relief into households now, it would only make the inflation situation worse.
Yeah, you have to balance that, and I think that's what the Reserve Bank has said, you know, that they hope that we are reaching the top of that cycle, but that they will be paying close attention to all of those factors going forward.
We must be at or near the peak, if not this month, then you know, sooner rather than later. I think this is the first chat we've had as a group since the super decision. The cap was announced, Michelle. Seemed to be some confusion around the place yesterday about what the longer term projections are on the number of people caught up in this $3 million cap. Is it clear to you exactly what that figure is for 30 years hence?
Yeah, so before we get to that, I just want to go back to first principles. Super was actually designed, was invented by Labor, and it is designed to provide for a dignified retirement. What has actually happened over the years is that it has morphed into a tax minimisation vehicle. So with respect to these question marks around indexation, I'm not going to actually wade into this because the numbers that were tabled yesterday have been misreported widely in the media, and Treasury, as we speak, are now doing modelling to actually land on what that real number should be and people who are caught up in indexation. The important take-home message here is that we came to government and found a pretty challenging set of economic circumstances. We have, the Australian people actually, have inherited $1 trillion of Liberal Party debt. In addition to that, we have intensifying pressures on our budget from aged care, from health, from defence, from the NDIS and so on. And this means that we've got to take responsible decisions going forward, and we have to look for fiscal repair. Fiscal repair. So this is what this is about. It's about enabling us to strike the right balance, and we think the 3 million threshold is that right balance in order to pay for all these other services that Australians rightfully expect.
It's not sufficient, though, is it? At $2 billion, you would need to find substantially more to pay for the many expenses.
Actually, Greg, in question time today, the Minister for Communications got up and tabled the fact that we are fixing connectivity black spots throughout this country. And do you know how much that's costing over 5 years?
I missed that number.
$2 billion.
Right. Okay.
About $2 billion. So $2 billion doesn't sound like a lot when you look at, you know, the wealth of a nation like Australia. But when you use $2 billion in a targeted, responsible way, it can be absolutely transformative.
Take a little bit of pressure off the budget. Where have you landed on all of this, Bridget, based on the figures that we've been confronted with? We don't know the long-term effect of not indexing it, but what's your position?
Well, I probably haven't landed anywhere in particular as yet, and I'm always really open-minded to these sort of discussions. And as I've said, you know, I certainly welcome a conversation about it. I think it's only appropriate that we have a conversation about whether it's superannuation or wider tax reform. Absolutely fine. I think that should be taken to an election on either side, like wherever that lands.
So the fact that this doesn't start till 2025, does that, you know, buy them any credit in your mind?
Well, I think some, but I still think it would be better to take a package to an election. When we started hearing about this, I thought, oh, great, like I welcome a conversation, but I sort of expected the conversation would go a bit more than a couple of days or a week before there was a decision. And of course, now I think we're seeing some of that uncertainty or confusion around what it might look like, what it might mean into the future. And like I say, I remain open to the conversation, but I would certainly be more appreciative of a wider conversation about the system and whether or not, if we're looking to fiscal repair, which is noble and an admirable aim, should we be doing you know, that in a more a wider way rather than a sort of a piecemeal approach, if you like.
Yeah,
so I remain unconvinced, but certainly open-minded.
All right, we are up against time today. I do want to cover off just at least one more matter. The Voice referendum machinery bill. It does appear, do you agree, Bridget, that your side might formalise a position that is against that, which doesn't augur well for the referendum itself, does it, if we can't even agree on the ground rules for it?
Look, I think there's a range of views on this, and for me personally, I'm somewhat kind of agnostic in relation to it. I can see where the conversations sit on both sides in terms of, I think part of the conversation is looking to modernise the machinery that we use for referenda generally, and I think that's the important part, that it doesn't just inform this referendum but future referendums. So I think there's an attempt to modernise the machinery of a referenda, taking into account that we have different availability of information, so do we need a pamphlet?
And it hasn't been touched for 20 years.
Yeah,
so,
that's right. And I think, you know, in terms of the arguments around funding, I think there are reasonable arguments on both sides that do you need to resource either in a modern environment? And of course, you should apply equal treatment to both sides, whichever way you go. So I'm fairly agnostic, and I think it's really that's really not where the rubber's going to hit the road in relation to this issue. It's going to be with the referendum itself, and Australians will have that decision.
And a quick one, Michelle, just on, I suppose, one of those points. Bridget covered many there, but, you know, on the need to modernise, I suppose, just to get us off on the right foot for this exercise.
Yeah, I'm all in favour of modernising this sort of legislation. I mean, you know, we live in a digital era. We have retained the mail out of the pamphlet to homes, but we are not going to be supporting funding using taxpayer money for the Yes and No campaign. We have, as I said, intensifying pressures on our budget. We think that money needs to be directed in other ways. And, you know, I think that strikes the right balance.
Well, as we sit here, it does sound like something of a standoff, but let's see, there's time to resolve it, perhaps, if this parliament is capable of that. Michelle, Ananda-Rajah, Bridget Archer, we'd love to have discussed more with you, but you've got places to be, I think. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Greg.